this edition of Manned Space, we take a look at a special collectible related to Skylab 3. Please watch for upcoming videos at least twice a week, during which I'll discuss the history of the space program by highlighting artifacts and memorabilia from my extensive space collection. An extension of the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs, Skylab, America's first space station, used much of the hardware and technology developed for previous manned missions. The program utilized the first two stages of a Saturn V to boost a third stage, reconfigured as a space station to provide laboratory and living quarters. Skylab was launched into orbit from Pad 39A at Cape Canaveral on May 14, 1973, aboard a modified Saturn V launch vehicle. Between May 1973 and February 1974, three-man crews lived and worked aboard Skylab. Referred to as Skylab 1 and SL2, the first mission was commanded by veteran Apollo 12 Commander Pete Conrad. Joined by science pilot Joe Kerwin and pilot Paul Weitz, the crew arrived at Skylab on May 25, 1973. The first major task undertaken by the crew was to effect repairs to Skylab, which suffered major damage during launch, and thus putting the future use of the space station at risk. During 3 separate spacewalks, the crew successfully deployed a sunshade to prevent the station from overheating and freed a jammed solar panel necessary for production of electricity. Their work complete, the crew of Skylab 2 returned to Earth on June 22, 1973, after 28 days aboard the space station. The second crew arrived at Skylab on July 28, 1973. Commander and veteran Apollo 12 moonwalker Alan Bean was accompanied by science pilot Owen Garriott and pilot Jack Lousma for the 59-day mission. While aboard Skylab, the hard-working crew spent hours studying the Earth and Sun and conducted scores of experiments. By the time the mission concluded on September 25, 1973, the crew had traveled more than 24 million miles. The third and final crew arrived aboard Skylab on November 16, 1973. Commander Gerald Carr, science pilot Ed Gibson, and pilot Bill Pogue lived and worked aboard Skylab for 84 days. During the mission, the crew employed the use of an electric furnace to create alloys and crystals, and photographed Comet Kohoutek on its loop around the Sun. The crew splashed down in the Pacific Ocean on February 8, 1974, thus ending what at the time was the longest manned space flight. Combined, the crews spent 740 hours observing the Sun with telescopes and brought home more than 175,000 solar pictures. Additionally, Skylab's Earth resource instruments and cameras captured over 46,000 photographs and 40 miles of electronic data tape. Finally, Skylab showed conclusively man's ability to adapt and function effectively in space for periods of up to 3 months. After 2,249 days in orbit, including 171 days of being occupied by crews, Skylab met her demise on July 11, 1979. With her orbit decaying and no means available to boost her orbit, she burned up upon re-entry in the atmosphere over the Indian Ocean and parts of Australia. So, over the years, with the exception of Pete Conrad, who died in 1999, and Joe Kerwin, I've had the opportunity to meet every Skylab crew member. Here I am in 2010 having a discussion with Skylab 3 Commander Alan Bean. An accomplished artist, we're talking about his painting entitled The Fantasy. He explains to me that his friendship with his Apollo 12 crew members inspired his fantasy that the three of them might walk on the moon together. Under Apollo mission parameters, however, only 2 astronauts would walk on the moon, while the third remained in orbit. Thus, the fantasy would remain that, a fantasy. He also described how he used moon boots and lunar tools, pressing them into wet paint to give his paintings depth and texture. The event I was attending, during which I talked to Alan Bean about the fantasy, was the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation's Astronaut Autograph and Memorabilia Show. Here I am at that same event sharing a word with Skylab 3 pilot Jack Lousma. Here I am later that evening sharing a good laugh with Jack, Apollo 17 Commander Gene Cernan, and my good buddy Don. I don't specifically recall what we were talking about, but I do remember laughing a lot with these guys. Before the night was over, I'd also have a chance to meet Skylab 3 science pilot Owen Garriott, as well as the entire Skylab 4 crew. Pictured here left to right are Ed Gibson, Bill Pogue, and Gerald Carr. That's me on the far right. The following day was the actual memorabilia and autograph show. The show offered the opportunity to have objects of your choosing signed by luminaries of the space program, dating back to Project Mercury through the Space Shuttle program. The object we'll look at today is a scale model of the Apollo Command Module that I had autographed by the crew of Skylab 3. Take note that the base upon which the model rests has been signed by Apollo 13 crew members Jim Lovell and Fred Hayes, thus making the two pieces together really special. The other thing to note is the great detail the model depicts. Here the command module is viewed from the top down. The hatch door is displayed standing up below the hatchway in order to highlight the detail of it. In this image, we're looking into the command module. We can see the headrest and much of the backrest of the center couch. Portions of the left and right headrests can also be seen, as can windows and handholds. According to Alan Bean, it's the texture of the model that captures the most detail and realism of the actual command module. As he took the model to sign it, Alan pointed to the honeycomb appearance of the exterior, as well as the color and luster of the vehicle, as being very close to what the Apollo spacecraft actually looked like following re-entry through the Earth's atmosphere. He also educated me on the Skylab mission numbering regimen that got confused during the program. Earlier, I indicated the first crew to arrive at Skylab was dubbed Skylab 1 and SL2, while displaying a mission patch that clearly designated the crew as Skylab 1. You can see that Alan designates the mission in two ways as he signed the bottom of the command module. He has written Skylab 2 using Roman numerals and SL3 using Arabic numerals. The explanation for the two designations is straightforward if not insightful. A simple error by NASA management at the time. NASA had designated the launch of Skylab itself as Skylab 1. Skylab 2, 3, and 4 were then allocated for each of the subsequent manned flights. According to Bill Pogue, the astronauts began receiving flight procedure documents labeled SLM-1, SLM-2, and SLM-3, a reference to Skylab manned missions. Other documents, however, were labeled SL2, SL3, and SL4, conforming to the official mission designations. According to Pogue, it soon became a confusing mess because the astronauts were receiving mail and other documents clearly meant for one of the other crews, and the people in the astronaut office mailroom became as bewildered, confused, and uncertain as the astronauts did. As was customary on all manned NASA missions, each crew was permitted to design its own mission patch. The patches had to then be submitted to NASA management for approval. Skylab was no exception. Each of the Skylab crews had designed their mission patches incorporating the official numerical designations Skylab 2, 3, and 4. However, during a visit by the director of the Skylab program, Skylab 2 Commander Pete Conrad asked him, "Are we 1, 2, and 3, or 2, 3, and 4? They were told that they are 1, 2, and 3. Pogue went on to say that each of the crews went back to redesign their patches to incorporate the numerals 1, 2, and 3. Apparently, the associate administrator for manned spaceflight took one look at the artwork and disapproved the designs because he said the official flight designations 2, 3, and 4 should be used and not 1, 2, and 3. When the crew set out to redesign their mission patches, they were finally advised it wouldn't be necessary. Use of the numbers 1, 2, and 3 was deemed acceptable. It seems that because Skylab was already being readied for launch, and there were items already on board Skylab that included patches with the 1, 2, 3 designations, it was deemed too expensive at that point to take steps to remedy the situation. Pogue concludes by observing that although officially designated as Skylab 2, 3, and 4, the mission insignias bear the numeric designations as follows. Skylab 2 used a Roman numeral 1, Skylab 3 used a Roman numeral 2, and Skylab 4 used an Arabic numeral 3. Thanks to the folks at collectspace.com for posting a piece written by Bill Pogue from which much of the details pertaining to the Skylab numbering confusion comes from. I actually came across the article while further researching for this presentation. A link to the article is provided below. Now, let's get back to our look at the command module model. Next up to sign it was pilot Jack Lousma. Here you see me talking to Jack and pointing to a space on the underside of the model. What I'm actually pointing out to him is where I'd like for him to sign it. In particular, as Alan Bean suggested, I asked him to place his signature in the location that corresponds to where he sat during his space flight. Note that now 2 of the 3 crew members have signed the model. You can see Alan Bean's signature is on the left, while Jack signed it to the right. The seating arrangement on the Apollo command module remained the same on all 15 manned flights. The commander occupied this left seat, while the command module pilot sat in the right. Think of an airplane. The captain sits in the left seat, and the first officer on the right. In the case of Apollo moon flights, it was the lunar module pilot who occupied the middle couch, but on Skylab it was the science pilot who sat in the center. On Skylab 3, that was Owen Garriott. You can see Owen placing his signature between those of his crewmates. At last, all 3 signatures have been added. The signing complete, I get one last chance to pose with Jack and Owen with the signed model. Unfortunately, Alan was busy signing other signatures, so he wasn't available for this photo. Now let's take a close-up view of the signatures. You'll see that in addition to affixing their bold autographs, each of the astronauts include a label indicating the role they played on the mission. Alan has placed a CDR under his name, shorthand for commander. In the case of Jack, it's PLT, a reference to pilot. For Owen, it's SPT, or science pilot. During the Apollo moon flights, crews identified as CDR, or commander, CMP, meaning command module pilot, and finally LMP, the lunar module pilot. We can't end without a final word about the Skylab mission numbering confusion. At the end of his piece, Bill Pogue observes that the numbering confusion extends to autograph collectors as well, who, in Pogue's words, quote, will scratch their heads trying to sort out their trophies, close quote. Well, at least in the case of this trophy, the addition of both mission designations eliminates the head scratching. Thank you to the crew of Skylab Roman numeral 2 and SL Arabic number 3. Please watch for upcoming videos at least twice a week, during which I'll discuss the history of the space program by highlighting artifacts and memorabilia from my extensive space collection, amassed over 40 years. Also, please like, subscribe, and click the notification button for more great content about manned space. Finally, before closing, I want to honor the lives of Owen Garriott, who passed away on April 15, 2019, and Alan Bean, who we lost on May 26, 2018. Thanks for the memories, guys.